Okay, so welcome to Bible study. This is our May 6th, 2025. So this is the eighth entry into our Old Testament Foundations series. Deacon Victor last month opened up our way from Joseph to Moses. So we're going to kind of do a very, very brief recap, but also in a progressive way. So we're going to set up. Now, one thing I didn't want to do as I began to prep for this, was I didn't want to just tell you who Moses is. I didn't want to just tell you what Moses did because I feel like even recently at Nova Hub we've heard of some of the things about Moses and what he did and who he was. So I want to kind of shape it in such a way that the life of Moses and even the life of Abraham through Joseph would inspire you to see the fullness of God's plan, how that continues through Moses, and how that even transcends towards Jesus. Um, so I have a lot of scripture that I'm going to be reading out before we actually get to Moses. So if anybody wants to write in the chat, I would appreciate it. I'm going to be reading all of these from the New American Standard Bible, NASB. So the first is actually in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 through 13. Therefore, let us fear if, while a promise remains of entering his rest, any of you may seem to have come short of it. For indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, speaking of the Israelites. But the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard. For we who have believed enter that rest, just as he said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Although his works were finished from the foundation of the world, for he has said somewhere concerning the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. And again in this passage, they shall not enter my rest. Therefore, since it remains for some to enter it, and those who formerly had good news preached to them fail to enter because of disobedience, he again fixes a certain day. Today, saying through David, after so long a time, just as has been said before, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, he would not have spoken of another day after that. So there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did also. And I'm not going to finish my passage there, but the reason I bring that passage up, not only is God, through the writer of Hebrews, speaking about the intention of God to bring Israel into the promised land. Okay. It was never God's intention as we get into Moses. It was never God's intention for the people to be marching around the mountain and marching around the territory for 40 days and 40 years. Or 40 years, not 40 days, but 40 years. But think of it like this. When Adam and Eve sinned and they fell, God had to remove them from Eden because of their proximity to the tree of life, lest they eat the tree of life while in a sinful state and live forever. Right? There was an actual tree of life where if you eat this tree, you would live forever. Um, so if God were to have allowed them to enter into Canaan, then they would have never been pruned. They would have never been able to grow in his image. Because when you think about the Israelites, not a single person that left and passed through the sea, so not a single person that saw Moses split the sea entered into Canaan. Moses was the last one to die, and upon his death, God tells Joshua, "My servant Moses has died, now pick yourself up and go into the land." They were just on the other side of the river, right? There was never a moment where God had them lost because he even says to Moses at some point upon their sin that you shall go into the land and you will be accompanied by my angel, but I myself will not go with you. And Moses says to him, I will not go unless you go. Show me your glory. So there's a process where it's not just about where they're going, but it's about who goes with them. Now it's important because we're equating here Canaan in this instance, we're equating the promised land of Canaan to that of the restfulness of God. And although they metaphorically were given this promise, the milk and honey, to which they would go, it's not because it's such a special land, but this is the land that God had given them. And so it's not just like when you get there, it's San Francisco in the 90s or the 1900s, and there's gold there, and everyone's going to flock there because of the value of the land. But this is the land that the Lord has given you, therefore it is holy, in the same way that the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. It wasn't that the day was holy, but because God blessed it, because God gave it, that's what made it holy, right? The land itself was corrupt. It was inhabited by corruption. That's why we have the conquest of Joshua. But the people of Israel had not had the opportunity to learn how to fight. They were slaves, they were needy, they were dependent. I would venture to say by the time we get to Joshua, the people would not complain if God didn't make uh, food fall from heaven. They would figure out a way to get their own food. But there was a process of those 40 years where God conditioned the people to prepare them because they would have marched right into Canaan and died to the first bit of opposition that they faced. So even that process, the fact that they could not enter was because of their disobedience, because God could have supernaturally did something, right? But because of their disobedience. So I continue to read, and I want to go to Genesis 15, where this all starts, because it's very early on in the journey of Abraham that God tells him, "This is your promise, this is your inheritance, this is what will happen to your descendants." And you don't see Abraham complain, and you don't see it happen where there's a big dialogue about it. But it says in Genesis 15, 13 to 21. Genesis 15, 13 to 21. God said to Abram, no, and this is right after he delivered one of the major promises, right? God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve. And afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. And then in the fourth generation they will return here. For the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. It came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I had given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite and the Kenizzite and the Cadmonite and the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Rephaim and the Amorite and the Canaanite and the Girgashite and the Jebusite. One thing I don't want us to misunderstand is that Abraham was not unaware of the people around him. I think sometimes we look at our own Christian bubble and the way we view society, the way we operate within community, even within our families, and we tune out the outside world. I don't know what's going on in culture. I don't know what's going on in politics. I don't know what's going on with my neighbors. But when I research the Old Testament, a lot of the statutes and I'll equate this to the New Testament in a moment. But a lot of the statutes you see, a lot of the things you see are reflections of what the world is doing. What does that look like in New Testament terms? We've heard Apostle Jordan teach it. You know, the concept of the apostle was not a church instituted office. It was a Roman instituted office, right? The apostles of the Roman Empire would go behind the military, and when a land was conquered, the apostles would be stationed in a land, and their job was to convert them from their old culture to the culture of the Romans. And that's why it's the apostolic mission to convert what was lost in the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. So you see this happen in different aspects of even the early establishment of Jewish culture. Now, is that to say because they're copying the world? I would not agree with that, but I think it's just the way things work, right? They're only able to do what they're used to, and God will work within the framework of what we understand. Um, so, yes, back to Genesis 15. Here we see that the Lord is saying to him, I have just told you that your descendants will outnumber the sand, the stars in the sky. So, in this, he's relating to Abram, who's coming from a culture of stargazing and horoscopes and things of that nature, being from Babylon. And now it's this promise. And we like to look at the first half of of Abraham's promise, right? You will go to the land that I will show you. I will give it to you, your descendants. This is the promise I provided for you. You will have a son. Um, Here's the ram stuck in the bush. We like to look at these aspects of Abraham's life, but then we ignore the different lies Abraham told to escape his death. We ignore this promise where, everything that happens, and we're going to talk about it, everything that happens to Israel, everything that happens to God's people was all for a reason. It all serves a purpose, and it's all a reflection of the life of Jesus, because we can't say that Jesus came as a representative of Israel, and to say that Israel and the life of God's people are a shadow and reflection of the coming life of Jesus,
The
if
white
all they
one,
ever
you see
knew
it?
was luxury, if all they ever knew was grace and favor, if they never had opposition, because Jesus was going to come in the same way, right? This is why Jesus is able to be a better covenant maker and a better covenant keeper than Israel, because it says that he was faced with every sin, every temptation, but he did not sin, right? If he was to come as fully God and there was never an opportunity for him to walk out in humanity, then Jesus would not have been qualified, because he would have not been of the same kind. But as we are made in the image of God, then we can see kind of our reflections, and that's just a tangent. But when I go back to the verse of Hebrews and we begin to see what he says about the people of Israel, and these are the people that we're going to be studying. um, for indeed we have had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard. The primary communication, the primary communication of God to the people of Israel was always, I will be their God and they will be my people. And that's repeated at different times throughout the Old Testament. The mission of God back then and now and forever is, they I will be their God and they will be my people. Regardless of the manifestation, when we look at the book of Revelation, that the end result is the new heaven and the new earth and the uniting of God's people, so that he would be our God and we would be his people. So everything that happens to God's people, everything that happens for God's people is all purposeful, right? Because even when God appears to Moses and he says, I am the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So there's a history, right? There's an oral tradition, an oral history of the works of this man named Abraham, this ancestor named Isaac, this ancestor named Jacob. And it says that they did not know of Joseph. So that's where we continue on, and we start to say to ourselves, why is it, twofold question that I asked the Lord? Why was it necessary for the people of God to be led into Egypt? So why was it necessary for the people of God to be led into Egypt? And why was it necessary for the people of God to be enslaved? Right? The Bible says 4 generations. If you read on, Moses goes on to say later that it was actually 430 years. So these two questions. I'm gonna jump around in my notes, but now I have Romans 8, 18 to 25. So think of what happened at the fall. If you eat of it, on that day you shall surely die. And we know in Romans that and I'm gonna getting ahead of myself a little bit, so I'm actually gonna read it first. Romans 8:18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. I don't want us to make the Bible about ourselves. Paul does a beautiful job of going between his personal encounter, his experience, and the condition of the world and the condition of the gospel. When he's talking about here is the condition of suffering, not just to us, but everything you see is a reflection of the kingdom. Every time you see a New Testament writer talk about the conditions, the habitat, the state of things, it's about the kingdom of God and how we're to be conformed. It's not so much about his personal pain. It's not about his loneliness. He's not talking just about the things that he personally suffers through, right? Because when we see Paul called in the book of Acts, and Jesus appears to Ananias, and he says it's necessary for you to heal him, for I am going to show him what it looks like to suffer for my namesake. right? So Romans 8, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of creation, that's how I know. For the anxious longing of creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons, as Apostle Jordan would say, the mature sons of God, right? Those who are developed, not just people, not just sons, not just men, but the mature sons of God who would walk in their calling. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. And not only this, but also we ourselves, having the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting eagerly to our for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, with perseverance we wait eagerly for it. So when we see this discourse of Paul, it's not until the very end that he begins to talk about us as individuals. And in that context, he speaks about our adoption, not about our pain, not about our physical condition, not about our physical circumstance. But when it comes to the sufferings of this present time and the anxiety and the longing of creation, revealing, waiting for the revealing of the sons, so that when I go back to Genesis, that's why there was a famine. That's why there's natural disaster. That's why everything's not perfect. That's why we have poverty. That's why we have anger. That's why we have hatred. That's why we have sin. Because subjection of futility was not because of creation's doing, but that's what it means when God said, in this day you shall surely die. He's not just speaking to Adam as the man, but he's speaking to Adam and everything Adam has under him. Because if everything under Adam is subjected to Adam, then everything that he reigns over is subjected to futility, just as he is. That's why we can say that just as Adam, through one man, sin entered into the world, through one man, Jesus Christ, everything would be redeemed. Because Jesus lived as one man and one God, but he subjected himself to the Father, so that through him all of creation would be redeemed, in the same way that through Adam all of creation was subjected to futility. So therefore, because of that, God in his sovereign action decides, and we're going to see the revelation of Joseph. Are we being blessed so far? We'll get to, I promise we'll get to Moses in a little bit. But that brings me now to the confession of Joseph in Genesis 45. Genesis 45, 7 through 8. And this is Joseph speaking to his brothers. God sent me here, God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. So, in all of his sovereignty, the world was subjected to the same fate as the flood, right? Not that water was going to come, but there was going to be a worldwide flood, a famine that was going to take everybody out. But God sent Joseph as a remnant to Egypt to preserve the people of God, right? And to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So let's find Jesus in this. God let's change this up a little bit and find Jesus. God sent Jesus before us to preserve a remnant in the earth and to keep us alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not man who subjected and sent Jesus, right? Jesus was not a response and a knee-jerk reaction because of sin, but it says that in the word that he was crucified from the foundation of the world. He was crucified for the purpose of our redemption, so that it was God, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, right? Not God was forced to send his son because of sin, but because he loved the world, right? He loved all of creation, of which we subjected to futility, that he had to send Jesus. So in the same way, therefore, in Genesis 45, God sent me here, Joseph, to preserve for you a remnant in the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. So, how does this relate to, and we're almost done with our introduction, but how does this relate to the provision of God, not only to deliver us, but to provide for us? We see this in Genesis 47. Genesis 47, 1 through 6. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. He took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, what is your occupation? So they said to Pharaoh, your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers. They said to Pharaoh, we have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flock, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now, therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. In the same way, Jesus goes to the Father and presents them. My people, my brothers, I no longer call you servants, but I call you friends. Right? What does it say? When he inherited the kingdom, it was his pleasure to call us his brothers, right? That's what the word says, right? So put us in the position where Jesus presents us to the Father, just like Joseph did, to Pharaoh, and says, "My father and my brothers and their flocks are all here because they are in a land. They come from a land of treachery, right? We come out of the kingdom of darkness, and that's when God looks to Jesus and says, "Give them the best of the land, and whoever is capable, put them in charge. Whoever is capable, they are prophets, they are apostles, they are teachers, they are pastors, they are evangelists to lead the sheep, not to be the most important, but to lead them in such a way that they would learn." Right. So even in the establishment, as God had sent Joseph into Egypt to prepare a remnant, and as the passing, right? Because Joseph was ready to go. Jacob was ready to go. And it's from this moment where we see the pouring out of God's plan, right? Not only were they stationed in Egypt, right? We like to look at the preservation of Israel and then we go straight to the promises of the tribes. But we skip this chapter where not only are they there, but it says the best of the land is at their disposal, and the best of the men. So the 12 tribes, the representatives of these tribes, are now placed over that of Egypt. So that is the mandate even of us, right? That's the mandate of Adam. Subdue the earth, multiply, and all of these great things. Now, before we get into our Exodus today, I want to give you some facts. Okay, just keep this in mind. We know about the Babylonian and Persian exile, right? How first it was Babylon through Nebuchadnezzar, then Persia. They took them into exile, and then through Persia they were released back into Israel, right? And we make such a big deal out of this, and we read Isaiah, we read Jeremiah, we read Ezra, we read Nehemiah, and we think of this big event in the history of God's people. But truth be told, that was just a 50-year period of time, right? We spend a lot of time reading about it because so many of the prophets came from that era, but at least a third of the prophets came after the exile was over or before the exile started. And they were telling Israel, look, if you do not change, this is what's going to happen, right? In the same way, in the year 538 BC, they return, right? Because it even says that when they rebuild the temple, there were some present who remembered the glory of the old temple. They remembered the glory of Solomon's temple, right? So there were people who went into captivity that came back, right? Okay. So here's some more facts. The Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, conquered Israel, including Judea, in about 333 BC. So that's about 205 years after they return from captivity. They're conquered. They're not sent into exile, but now they're under Greek supervision. 187 years later, in about 160 something BC, Rome conquered Greece. So now they're under Roman supervision. And within that time period, from 187 to the birth of Jesus, we have the Maccabean Revolution. But it's from this moment, right? Because I think it's important for us to get the context of how did Israel get from David to Jesus, right? We have the Israelite kings. we have Babylon, we have Persia, we have about 200 years of everything's okay. And then we have the dark period, right, after Malachi, where they are conquered by Greece and then they are conquered by Rome. So at this point, there has been about 200 years to which they are not free. And their mind is, we need the Messiah to come and deliver us from opposition. But Egypt had Israel as slaves for 430 years, right? But all we get from the Bible is they had to do labor and they were forgotten. And that's not to say God did not care about them, but I think because there's so little given to us about this time period, we don't consider what God was doing or what God wanted to do, right? We always rush from Joseph to the burning bush. But there's 430 years that were actually prophesied by God the Father directly to Abraham as a purposeful moment in time, right? And that brings me back to Genesis 15. Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and after they will come out with many possessions. So we have to put into context that this is the most traumatic period of time in the history of Israel. And it was also the very first 400 years of the history of Israel. Because there was no Israel, there was Jacob and there were his sons. And they began to populate so much that they formed an entire army of people from this one family over the span of 400 years. Okay. And that leads me to where we get into our text. Actually, I have one more passage, but I'm going to save it for the end, okay? Um, I want to give an overview from the perspective of Nehemiah. And this is probably the most powerful explanation of the life of Moses that you can find in one solitary place. This is Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 7 to 21. Nehemiah 9, 7 to 21. You are the Lord God who chose Abram and brought him out from Ur of the Chaldeans and gave him the name Abraham. You found his heart faithful before you and made a covenant with him to give him the land of the Canaanite, of the Hittite and the Amorite, of the Perizzite, the Jebusite, and the Girgashite, to give it to his descendants. And you have fulfilled your promise, for you are righteous. You saw the affliction of our fathers in Egypt and heard their cry by the Red Sea. Then you performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh, against all his servants, and all the people of his land. For you knew that they acted arrogantly toward them, and made a name for yourself as it is this day. You divided the sea before them, so they passed through the midst of the sea on dry ground. And their pursuers you hurled into the depths, like a stone into raging water. And with a pillar of cloud you led them by day, and with a pillar of fire by night, to light for them the way in which they were to go. Then you came down on Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven. You gave them just ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments, so you made known to them your holy Sabbath and laid down for them commandments, statutes and laws through your servant Moses. You provided bread from heaven for them for their hunger. You brought forth water from a rock for them for their thirst. And you told them to enter in order to possess the land which you swore to give them. So we see such a, 14 verse summary of who God was to not only that bloodline, but how he led them and every step of the way he was with them. And then he goes on to say, but they, our fathers, acted arrogantly. They become stubborn and would not listen to your commandments. They refused to listen and did not remember your wondrous deeds, which you had performed among them. So they became stubborn and appointed a leader to return to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God of forgiveness, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. And you did not forsake them, even when they made for themselves a calf of molten metal and said, this is your God who brought you up from Egypt and committed great blasphemy blasphemies. You, in your great compassion, did not forsake them in the wilderness. The pillar of cloud did not leave them by the day to guide them on their way, nor the pillar of fire by night to light for them the way in which they were to go. You gave them your good spirit to instruct them. Your manna you did not withhold from their mouth, and you gave them water for their thirst. Indeed, 40 years you provided for them in the wilderness, and they were not in want. Their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet swell. So he gave them the spirit to instruct them. He gave them water for their thirst, and manna he did not withhold from their mouth. So it's like we see so vividly how Jesus was represented in the Exodus, right? And even goes on to say their clothes did not wear out and their feet did not swell. They didn't have access to the mall. They didn't have access to more shoes. They just walked until God told them to cross the river. And his only commandment was to worship and to serve, right? Even when Moses comes to deliver the people, he says to Pharaoh, "Let us go out from this place so that we may worship." Right? And he did not lie in that place. He did not, and even though it was God's intention, as we'll read soon, but I have one more scripture, and this is from Exodus before we get into chapter 3, which is where we'll spend the rest of our time. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us, and fight against us and depart from the land." I don't know about you, but I feel like Egypt covers a lot of space. And a lot of people must have lived who were born in Egypt. And now you're telling me that from these 12 tribes of men, now the Israelites outnumber the Egyptians. I feel like sometimes we overlook that fact. Okay, so now we know what happens, right? The rest of Exodus 1. Moses is born, he's put into the basket, he's delivered through the Nile, he comes out in the Pharaoh's house. Pharaoh's daughter sees him, recovers him, and he's raised by his own mother in the Pharaoh's house. Chapter 2, we see Moses observing the people. Do not rely on the account of Prince of Egypt. I love the music, but you must look at your Bible, right? There's no encounter where Moses is looking at the wall and discovers from this hieroglyphic that he is himself, right? Because you see in the Prince of Egypt, he sees the entire story of his birth written on the wall. Like he's lived in this palace for 40 years and he's never seen these pictures, right? But so this leads me to believe that in the back of his mind, it's hard for me to think that his mom wasn't telling him in secret, "I am your mother. This is who you are. This is your lineage. These are your people. This is what the Lord did for you." Because there's a knowledge when he's delivered and he comes back to just know who his brother is, to know who his sister is, for the people to understand, right? Because if the people were to think that he was Egyptian born, then the Jew who spoke back to him and said, "Are you going to strike me down?" would not have raised his voice if he thought that Moses was actually a son of the Pharaoh, right? Because Moses didn't retaliate, right? He didn't kill the Israelite man because they had an understanding of, "I am adopted in this house." That's also why the Pharaoh was so quick to turn on Moses, right? Because Moses killed a soldier, and for that reason, um, Pharaoh wanted to put him to death. So we don't get insight, but it's hard for me to comprehend, even in the telling of the movie, how he's racing chariots with Ramses, right? And how he's so ingratiated in the culture. Um, but it was not Pharaoh himself that raised Moses, it was his daughter through Moses's mother, right? So I think we can become so enamored by the way the media portrays Moses that we think, even in the Prince of Egypt, my last shot at the movie, I promise. When Moses kills the soldier, um, Ramses, right, his brother, who later becomes Pharaoh, tries to prevent him from running away. And he says, "We can fix this, we can cover it up." But Moses is so ashamed by what he does, that's why he leaves. But we have to understand his perspective here. He's raised for 40 years in the castle. He's probably afraid for his life, afraid of being found out. And I'm just speculating here. But he has to understand that there's a greater purpose for this, right? So this leads me to chapter 3. And at this point, he has escaped from Egypt. He has tended the flock. He has met his wife, and he has done these things. And another 40 years has passed. So he's 80 years old. It's been 40 years that he's lived in this place. And this is where we pick up in chapter 1, or chapter 3, verse 1. Um, Now Moses was pasturing the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. When you see Horeb, Sinai, right? Same mountain, Horeb, Sinai. What else happened here? I'm 95% sure this is where Elijah ran to and saw the different things happen. It was on Horeb. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight. Give me just a moment. Um, okay, no. I thought I wanted to see a fact, but I was incorrect. So we're good. Okay. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why this bush is not burned up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him and from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He also said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Again, when you look into who Jethro was, he was not a it says he was a priest, but it doesn't say he was a priest of God, right? He's the priest of Midian. But for God to come to Moses and to call him in the same manner that he called Samuel, and for Moses to reply the way that Samuel was instructed to reply, and for him to say, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, and for Moses to hide his face, it tells me that Moses knows who Abraham is, who Isaac is, and who Jacob was, right? When you look into the culture, they move in 3 generations, okay? The Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. For I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. That furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. Therefore, come now, I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, Certainly I will be with you, for this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Here's a side note. When you look into the Samaritans, when you look at what they say, right? When you see Jesus encounter the Samaritan woman, and she says to him, you, the Jews, worship at the temple in Jerusalem, but we worship at this mountain, right? What is this mountain? This mountain is Horeb. This mountain is Sinai. So where is Moses now? Is in the land that will one day be Samaria. And I just need you to understand this about the Samaritans. Their theology, they did not follow after Moses, right? They stopped at you shall bring the people to this mountain and they shall worship. So that's very integral to the understanding and the reason why Jesus had to redeem the Samaritans, right? He came for that remnant that still worshiped in the mountain. Okay, moving on. Then Moses said to God, Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am, or Yahweh, right? And he said, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite and the Hittite and the Amorite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. They will pay heed to what you say, and you with the elders of Israel will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my miracles, which I shall do in the midst of it. And after that he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed, but every woman shall ask her of her neighbor and the woman who lives in her house articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, thus you will plunder the Egyptians. Um, when it comes to Pharaoh, when it comes to Egypt, when it comes to what God was doing, um, I really want to find guys, give me just a moment. I really want to find something for you guys that I did a long time ago. Give me just a moment, please. Just a moment, please. While I look for this, does anyone have any comments, questions, thoughts so far? Anything? If not, it's okay because I found what I was looking for. Okay. So and we'll get into this more a little bit in the next lesson. But a lot of us will say, why was, it says that God repeatedly he hardened the Pharaoh's heart, right? So even though, and we see some of this in I want us to see the parallels of Moses and Isaiah. You know, whom shall I send? Who will go for me? Lord, I am a man of unclean lips. Who am I that you shall be mindful of me? Right? Different men throughout the Bible. And I am a man of unclean lips, and the coal touches his lips, and he's commissioned. You will go to a people who will not hear you. You will preach, they will not listen to you. And in the same way, God is commanding Moses to go, knowing that the Pharaoh will not listen to him because God had hardened his heart, right? And why was this necessary? Because when God promised Abraham that he would have the people enslaved in this land, he says at the end of that passage in Genesis 15 that I will judge the land, right? For the wrath is not complete. So not only was God delivering, what does John say? For the Son of Man did not come to judge the world, but that through him the world would be judged. So, in the same way that God sent Jesus from place to place, the Spirit drove him into the wilderness to be tempted, that he would overcome the devil. The Spirit, God the Father sent his begotten Son so that through him the world would be saved. And because they did not believe in him, they are condemned already, right? So it was necessary for God to not only deliver his people through Moses, but for Moses to be the agent by which God would judge Israel. Because he goes on to say, what is in your hand? He says the staff, right? He also says that elsewhere in the Bible, right? So we see the consistencies of the Lord. So I want to read this. I prepared this a long time ago, and I just went and found it in my notes. But I want us to look at the 10 plagues of Egypt, okay? And I'm going to post this um, in the chat. I'm going to post this in the chat so you guys can read along with me, okay? So we have the first plague, and I'll return to the context in a little bit. The first plague, the Nile turned to blood. This was judgment on Apis, the god of the Nile, Isis, the goddess of the Nile, and however you say that, the guardian of the Nile. Second place, the frogs, judgment against Heget, the frog-headed goddess of birth over Egypt. Third plague, the gnats, judgment against Set, the god of the desert of Egypt. Fourth plague, the flies, judgment against Uachit, the fly god. They had a fly god. The fifth plague, the death of the cattle, was judgment against the goddess Hathor and the god Apis, both depicted as cattle. Sixth plague, the boils, a judgment against several gods over health and disease. Seventh plague, hail, attacked Nut, the sky goddess, Osiris, the crop fertility god, and Set, the storm god. Eighth plague, the locust, attacked Nut, Osiris, and Set once again. The ninth plague, darkness, judgment against the sun god Ra. This god was symbolized by the pharaoh, right? And tenth plague, death of the firstborn, judgment on Isis, the protector of children. So in every move of God, and every judgment against Egypt, we see him not only judging Egypt, but condemning their gods. And we see this pattern occur once again in Samuel, right? We taught this. When the Ark of the Covenant was taken into a land that did not, where it did not belong, God inflicted them with hemorrhoids that were so bad that people were dying, right? And it doesn't say that. I forget what word the Bible uses, but everywhere the Ark of the Covenant went, where it did not belong, right? They put it in the temple, and I forget whatever false god it was. First it was toppled sideways, and then after a few nights, the hands were cut off, the head was cut off of the statue, and we see this again wherever the Lord is, that is not like Him, that remains stubborn and hardened of hearts. We see his wrath come against the enemies of the Lord. And when his judgment was fully, and again, relate this to not just the Exodus, but to the coming of Jesus and his people. When Jesus was on the cross and took all of our sin, and he said, "It is finished," that is when the deliverance occurred, right? It says he went into hell, and he went into the places, and he waged a war, and he took out those who and he relates them to the men in Genesis, right? The Nephilim, and all of this, right? And he made a way of passage for those who were in the bosom of Abraham, who were in paradise, to have a way into heaven. And it says that they began to see in the streets the remnants and the resurrection bodies of the saints of the past, right? It says this in the book of John, or Matthew, I can't remember, or maybe it was Luke. I don't. It's in the gospel, but we see the reflection here that Jesus was greater. It says Jesus is greater than Moses because he is a son, right? That's what it says in Hebrews. He is greater than Moses in the house, even though they both built, but he is a son, right? So Jesus comes and he takes upon our sin, and he lives in a land that he was a stranger in. And who sent you? I am who I sent me. Because Jesus says to the Pharisees, before Abraham was, I am. That was his declaration that he himself was God, right? That's why they wanted to kill him. But we see here that when Jesus fulfilled not just his assignment, but when he did as Moses did, he took it a step further, because he got an inheritance. Because in proverbial terms, he did not strike the rock, right? He remained obedient. Moses was obedient up until the point that he wasn't. Jesus is obedient to the point where he became good enough, right? It says, those who are good, do not call me good, only the Father is good. Jesus became good enough, and he became deserving to deliver us from the kingdom of darkness, right? It says God delivered us from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of his beloved Son, the Christ, the Jesus, because of what he did. So Jesus was, as Moses, the change agent by which the world, or Egypt, right? In those terms, Egypt was the world, right? Jesus was the change agent, and as was Moses, to deliver the people from Exodus. And it says when they came out, they will plunder the enemy. They will come out with riches, and they will sojourn, right? This redemption, the sanctification of our bodies. That's why we don't get saved and go directly into heaven, right? And as they did, if you hear his voice, right? Hebrews is writing to believers today. If you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as they did in the day of rebellion. For if you do, you will cease to enter into his rest. But when you hear his voice, enter into that rest. And I want to bring you one more thing before I open it up once again. When we see in Exodus, or sorry, the end of Genesis, that Joseph is used to preserve the land. Again, if Joseph was not there, then Egypt would have suffered the same fate as Canaan, right? But he could not do that in Canaan because he had no power, he had no authority. He was just a man, right? What did God do through Joseph? We see the manifestation of this. Um, when Solomon is made king in both Second Kings, First Kings and Second Chronicles, we see these events unfold where we had two accounts of the same event. In one of them, he's dreaming and he says, "I want to have wisdom to rule your people as my father David did." And then he prays, right? It says he sacrifices thousands of animals and for this X amount of days and sacrifices unto the Lord. And upon the sacrifice, God shows up. So this is Second Chronicle 7, and I don't want to just read what we're familiar with. We're familiar with verse 14, but I want to give a context, a pretext, and a post-text, okay? So this is Second Chronicles chapter 7, Second Chronicles chapter 7, verses 12 through 18. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon at night and said to him, I have heard your prayer, and have chosen this place for myself as a house of sacrifice. If I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, right? What did he do in the land of Joseph? What is a famine? No rain. If I shut up the heavens so that there is no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, sounds like one of the plagues. Or if I send pestilence among my people, it sounds like the hemorrhoids that he sent against those who stole the ark. Um, and my people, and this is where we start, right? And my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. Then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. That doesn't happen until the Lord made a decision to shut up the heavens, to command the locusts, and to send pestilence. You know, we'll read that verse in Second Chronicles and we'll equate it to just the negative misgivings and the lack of resources and the bad events that happen in our lives. Well, if my people who are called by my name and you know humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sin and heal their land. And then he goes on to say, Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer offered in this place. For now I have chosen and consecrated this house, that my name may be there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. As for you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, even to do according to all that I have commanded you, and will keep my statutes and my ordinances, then I will establish your royal throne, as I covenanted with your father David, saying, You shall not lack a man to be ruler in Israel. Now, here's the thing. Solomon messed that up for the bloodline, right? After Solomon died, the kingdom split in two, right? Not only did he not preserve it for future generations, he made sure he was the last king in that bloodline that was righteous or according to the plan of God. Now, but this is where God was faithful. God made Adam. This is perfect. Here's dominion, subdue the earth, right? Adam was made in God's image. So Adam is like Solomon, messed it up. However, God said, I promise your father David. So what did he do? He sent Jesus, who is you know, the root of Jesse, the son of David, the lineage of David, no longer of the tribe of Levi, but he's of the tribe of Judah. So in the same way, that Moses, you know, in a sense, and later Jesus was to correct the mess of Adam and that's made final in Jesus. He also corrected the mess of Solomon. But there's the truth, right? If I shut up the heavens that there's no rain and I send pestilence and the locusts devour the land and leave it destitute, if my people who call me by name humble themselves and pray, I will hear from heaven and I will hear their land. I have come to you, Moses, for the cry of my people and the oppression, the cries of my people have reached from heaven, and they have prayed. So I have heard, and I will come and heal their land. How does he do that? Because we've established this is the land of the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the all of these people that are presently in Canaan, because there were no Israelites there to subdue the earth. Well, now they're coming back. They're in the process of being delivered, and now they're going to go in the name of the Lord. So even in the way that the Lord uses the people of Israel, right? He doesn't use those who are dirty, he doesn't use those who are unfaithful, but he uses those who he has purified and raised to go back into the place where they were once supposed to be, right? From the place where they were no longer inhabiting, so that they would represent God. And he says, if you follow my commandments, if you do this thing, if you live this way, then you will not lack a man on the throne. But here's the issue. We are incapable of doing that. Moses was incapable of being the deliverer at the end of the day because he himself was sinful. But Jesus, right, you're only going to go as far as ahead. But Jesus, when he comes in the image of God as the greater Moses and did not sin, now everyone can enter into Canaan because they're following a leader who did not sin or does not have the capability of sinning because he has already passed the test. So are we starting to see here the importance of not just Moses, but how even from the promises of Abraham through Joseph, this all ties together? Are we being blessed so far, church? What are we thinking? Yes. Amen. I want to go back to this. Romans 8, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. So, in the spirit, as Moses was to Israel, we are to all of creation. So that the redemption is not just about getting to go to heaven. Redemption and favor and grace and mercy and the cross is not just about one day I will go to heaven, but it's about what does it look like to be a deliverer in my own sphere in such a way that creation is crying out for me. So with that being said, that's all I really have prepared for you guys. Just about an hour. Um, I'm gonna open it one more time for any questions or thoughts or statements. And if not, we'll be back in 2 weeks and we're going to um, really get into the details from the burning bush to Mount Sinai. So this is kind of like an overview. We'll be getting into the specifics of what Moses did leading up until the commandments. Amen. Let me end this recording.